Good evening. It's always a great event when you have to say good evening 4 times and ask people to take their seat to start the event. So this is very fortuitous and is pretending to a really lively event tonight. My name is David Lewis. I'm the Dean of the School of Constructed Environments here at Parsons. And I welcome you all to this event, From Field to Form, Straw. I'm also the principal of LTL Architects, and I'm really pleased to invite and to welcome tonight's panel discussion on straw. This is the 5th event in the From Field to Form series organized by the Architecture League, in part catalyzed by our publication, Manual of Biogenic House Sections, From Field to Form, which brings together a range of experts from growers to manufacturers, architects to builders, who are working with biogenic and geogenic materials with the goal of expanding their use to address climate change, biodiversity, overhead piano speeches, and the human health consequences of our current industrialized building systems and musical interludes. The 4 previous From Field to Form events provided an introduction, focused on stone, on earth, and on hemp last fall. Today, we turn to straw. We are indebted for this event to the work of the Architecture League and Parsons Healthy Materials Lab for their extraordinary research, work, and advocacy, and the staff and faculty of the School of Constructed Environments. This program is supported in part by public funds from the New York State Council on the Arts, with the support of the Office of the Governor and the New York State Legislature, as well as by members of the Architectural League. The League welcomes anyone interested in architecture, art, and environment to join the League. More information is available at the check-in desk as well as online at arcleague.org. As a reminder, 1.5 New York State and AIA CEUs are available to all participants, both members and non-members, who attend the event in its entirety. You will scan the QR code at the check-in desk for registration information at the end. So, tonight's edition is co-presented and co-hosted by the Healthy Materials Lab at Parsons, and I'm pleased to introduce Jansara Ruth, Design Director of the lab, to begin our conversation. Jansara.
Thank you for that lovely musical introduction. So I too am delighted to welcome you to Field to Form Straw. This is the 2nd Field to Form in the series that we have had the privilege to partner with the Architectural League on. And so I want to thank our colleagues at the League, specifically Anne Reiselbach and Zoe Fruchter, who have made this collaboration just kind of a delight and deepened our ability to present this work out into the field, into the industry. My name is Jansara Ruth, as David mentioned. I'm here and joined by many of our team and representing Healthy Materials Lab today. I don't know if I will acknowledge all of them. Let me see. We have Leah, who really made this whole organization and the space possible. She works in the backstage to make everything seamless. So thank you, Leah. Yeah, exactly. G and Malia are our comms team who help get the word out to you, and they're around here somewhere. They're going to help get the word out to everybody else tonight and tomorrow. Jess is our material researcher who has put together a table here of straw samples and has orchestrated with some of our panelists, with all of our panelists, and then others of our guests tonight and others who aren't here to put out some of the materials that are made of straw that are available now. So I invite you to come and look at that. I think Ace is going to tell you about the other table that is connected to the building materials are food materials, also made from the same plant. Layla, who can't be here, heads our material research, and she's also participated in this material research. Catherine is the head of education. I'm just calling everybody out because we work as a team here, and it's just a collaborative event. And of course, my colleague in crime, Allison Mears, who's pointing to somebody else. I just said Catherine. Catherine, who heads our education here, and Allison Mears co-founded the lab with me. So I hope I didn't leave anybody out. Goja there, who's been in and out of the lab for many years. So thanks to the team. We as a team are dedicated to placing people's health at the center of all design decisions. And in practice, that means we raise awareness about toxics in our built environment and work to make healthier alternatives more popular and accessible. Our particular focus is to transform affordable housing to be healthier so that all people can thrive. At Healthy Materials Lab, we understand that change begins when we ask questions, when we have conversations like these tonight, and when we invite experts from a variety of disciplines to question our assumptions about our own design decisions and their impacts. And we're excited about the opportunity to dig deep into the possibilities of building with straw. So I have a short few slides to share before we introduce our panelists. And this is really from how we arrived at straw from the Healthy Materials Lab perspective. If we look back at human history, we know that people found and used nature's materials to make their shelters. Our ancestors scoured their local landscape for matter, inventing tools and methods for manipulating materials to improve daily life, like we like to do. Survival on Earth depended upon our curiosity about the stuff around us. As inquiry about matter around us evolved, we gained understanding of atomic structures of this matter, and people began to speculate on other molecular structures that are not found in nature, and began inventing new materials without understanding how they would degrade or impact environments and all living things. And now, synthetic materials are our ubiquitous building blocks of our homes and of our lives. We're on a mission to accelerate the building of healthy, affordable homes, to eliminate toxic, climate-polluting chemicals and materials, and replace them with healthier, carbon-sequestering materials. Because products typically used in construction contain materials that are linked to human disease. Their ingredients impact people in construction, production, as well as the people who live in the materials, with those materials in their homes for long periods of time. And as you might know, contemporary affordable homes are primarily constructed of products that are made from petrochemicals. These fossil fuel-based products use a vast array of untested, often toxic chemicals that consume and emit carbon. And the places where these products are made are polluting the water, air, earth that all living things rely upon to survive. So this is a systemic problem, and we look at it like that. It's known that the materials in buildings, cities, objects, and furniture are releasing toxic particles that are absorbed into all of our bodies. We assume that the materials and products that we use and use on our daily life, not only in our buildings but in our consumer products too, have been tested for safety. Yet, most chemicals commonly used in the United States are not regulated for their impact on human health or the environment. The Exposome Project provides evidence that 90% of human diseases are from the exposures over our lifetimes, and only 10% are as a result of our genetics. You get that? Only 10% are a result of the genetics. This research is explained even in more depth by our partner at New York City's Mount Sinai Institute for Exposome Research, which reveals that thousands of industrial chemicals are now found in the blood of all of us. And these are the same chemicals that trigger many of the diseases that harm us today, from cancers to diabetes. Yet, a typical residential wall system in the US shows that many layers of building products often contain those same toxic chemicals. So you see how we're eager for healthier building systems to become the norm. We're at an inflection point. We're living through kind of an exciting time for all kinds of reasons, as we all know. But we cannot continue to build in the same way that Western civilization has been developing. At Healthy Materials Lab, we're asking, what is the pathway forward? How can we design and build healthy buildings today? We address the toxics and climate issue by charting new pathways to design and build healthy buildings. Here are photos. I guess I jumped the gun. Here are photos of our team. We work interdisciplinary because we feel that the change has to be made from multiple disciplines at once and in a collaborative nature towards bringing awareness and build change. We look at materials and ingredients through the lens of material health, asking how does it impact human health, carbon emissions, social equity? Does a product produce waste? Or is it biodegradable or regenerative? Does it pollute our water, soil, and ecosystems? We ask these questions of materials at every stage of their life cycle. And we see that building homes is central to our ability to make this change. Through building healthy, affordable housing, we can build a demand for agriculturally based products, while also addressing toxics, carbon, equity, and loss of biodiversity issues. And as we improve materials for buildings and building systems, we also encourage economic development, workforce development, profitable agricultural systems, new materials, and product development, all of which support healthier lives. So the idea that homes can be built of the byproducts of food production addresses so many of these issues. Straw building is not new, but we are at the cusp of seeing its acceleration. It's encouraging to think that we can eliminate the use of toxic greenhouse gas producing building materials and instead build our cities with renewable plants. If you caught the program we hosted last December with Martin Pacot, founder of Topophile, you will have seen these examples of social housing and civic buildings in France, which are made of straw and other nature-based materials. This one is senior housing. Here's some more social housing, an early childhood education center. So what if New York City's building industry proliferated with straw materials? You're chuckling, so you might know this work of Agnes Dennis, who's an artist in 1982 who grew 2 acres of wheat on Battery Park. She was prescient. So tonight we're excited to connect the work of trailblazers working on exactly these issues, who have similar ideas to express this, and they're doing it. Each of their work is at the leading edge of creating a fully functional system from harvesting and farming grain to producing scalable building products to architecture with straw. Their knowledge is essential to make necessary change for the construction and architecture industry. So please help me welcome Ace, Jacob, Alex, and Paul. I'm going to give you a brief introduction of each of them. You can find more extensive bios on our website, both on the Architecture League and on the Healthy Materials Lab websites. There's more expensive, but we'll just, I don't know if this is exactly, it's not exactly alphabetical order. It's kind of random. We'll start with the farmer. Alex English is a farmer and a small business owner who works with the Kenyon family at Nitty Gritty Farms, a family-owned, operated farm that produces certified grains in the Champlain Valley of Vermont. Nitty Gritty Grain manages 600 acres of cropland, growing certified organic wheat, corn, mixed legumes, many other things, and produces flour and cornmeal too, hence a table over here. Paul Lewis is principal at LTL Architects based in New York City and professor at Princeton University School of Architecture. Like you've heard from David Lewis, LTL Architects published Manual of Biogenic House Sections in 2022, focusing on the architectural potentials of plant and earth-based materials. Their current exhibitions featuring the work of the biogenic house sections and experiments with straw are traveling across the US right now to design centers in universities to spread the word. And from New Frameworks in Vermont, we have Ace McCarlton, the co-founder and director of Vision and Strategy, and Jacob Deva Rakusin, co-founder and the director of Building Science and Sustainability. They offer design-build services that blend natural materials and methods with high-performance products, such as these straw-based panels and modular straw homes. New Frameworks is an impressively progressive organization, multiracial, women, queer, trans-owned worker cooperative. We're thrilled and excited to hear about their strategies, victories, and challenges as they realize their goals to make a climate-just, regenerative, healthy building a mainstream reality. So I'm thrilled that you all made the effort to come here from Vermont, from downtown, from New Jersey. And there has been a lot of conversation to prepare for tonight, so I'm thrilled to introduce you all. We're going to start where the seed grows, and I'll just lift your slides. Is this, maybe that's speaker view, right? Thanks.
Howdy. I figured that was the most farmer way to say hello to everybody. So, as John Stewart mentioned, I'm Alex, and I've worked with the Kenyon family for a long time at this point. I actually do now live in Brooklyn, so I'm not with them full-time anymore. But when I can, I head up there and give them a hand as best as I can. The Kenyon family has been farming grains in the Champlain Valley for about 20 years. There's a very long and rich history of growing grains in the Northeast. I won't bore you with all of that, but it is not the easiest place to grow grains. And these folks have taken the time to learn how to do this exceptionally well, and it's very impressive what they're doing. So, one of the biggest questions I was asked coming into this is, what is straw? And so to break that down for you, up here we have a hay bale on the left and a straw bale on the right. Hay is composed of various grasses and legumes, which provide food sources primarily for animals, because they do have nutritional value, whereas straw is just purely the byproduct of wheat. It's the stalk of the plant. There's no nutrition in it. It does nothing for anyone to consume it other than builders or animals with bedding. But so straw is the byproduct of growing grain. It's the stalk of the wheat. The wheat berries are at the top of the plant, and you'll see a picture of wheat in a moment. But the wheat berries are what we harvest to make flour, which we have bread over here that is from these very plants. And once harvested, the combine, which we'll see a picture of, harvests the wheat and leaves a bunch of trash behind on the field. That trash is essentially straw. And so we go in and we bale it up. Straw does not break down if you plow it back into the land very quickly. It makes it really, really difficult to plant if you plow it under. So typically it's baled off so that it can actually help us prep the land to plant the next crop. So the way we start growing it is essentially we have to plow the land, right? So this is a plow tractor, and we flip the land over, and that all you see there is actually hay land, and we'll actually plow it while the hay is at its peak growth sometimes, and that is called green manure. And so we're actually putting a lot of material back under in the soil so that it helps with green manure. And it takes a lot more passes to prep the land in organic farming because we're not spraying, so we're not killing any of the plants. We're not using herbicide, we're not using pesticides, and so we'll have to work the land a lot more to get it ready because we're essentially trying to kill all the weed seeds by turning them back into the soil over and over. This is a grain drill. This is how we plant the wheat. And so after we plant the wheat, it sprouts, and it usually grows to about this height that you can see in here. It's like, short grass. And like I said, we don't use any herbicides, and so this is called a tine weeder, and we'll go back with that, and that's how we do weed control. And so we just drag that over the plant. It doesn't hurt the wheat plant, but it will kill the weeds underneath. So as the wheat matures, it grows luscious and green and tall. A lot of people don't think of a wheat field as being luscious and green, but it is, and it's really beautiful. And then in the beginning of July, usually, it'll start to turn gold, and the heads will lean over. And once the heads lean over, it's an indication to us that it's getting pretty close to being ready to harvest. So in organic farming, we wait till the plant dies on its own, and it dries down. It has to be dry enough that the combine can harvest those wheat berries out of the heads without crushing them. And so we have to wait until weather is on our side, until there's an opening in sunshine, but the plant is dry enough. Whereas in conventional farming, they'll go in and they'll spray the whole field, killing the plant in a matter of days, and they can harvest it. They can really time their harvest. I've handled some material, some bales that have been that have come off of fields that have been sprayed, and they feel a lot different. There's a lot of residue on them. John Sarah brought up a point that we're looking at, how these materials in our homes affect us. And in organic farming, we harvest the wheat, it gets dried down, and then essentially it goes through a grain cleaner, which is just sifting out any small grains, and a magnet, so there's no metal in there. But you are eating it right from the field in your bread. And to think that a lot of that is sprayed, not ours, but a lot of it's sprayed and then ground up right into flour is really disturbing. So after the combine harvested, it leaves these windrows behind. Those are the trash piles, if you will, of precious straw. And so it leaves these windrows, and then we'll come in with a baler. And the baler, this is actually baling hay. I didn't have a picture of it baling straw. But the baler compacts the material into a chamber, and then essentially kicks it out the back into a wagon, and that's how we get bales. And before the invention of the baler, this is something Ace and I have spoken about. This material was collected loosely. There are many different types of balers, different sizes and formats of bales that probably have a huge effect on how you guys all work with it. We make what are called small squares. But the baler is definitely probably one of the biggest game changers for this level of production. And so in this picture, you can see this stubble that's left behind. And so when the combine harvests the wheat, in organic farming, there's a ton of green material, weeds that we couldn't get that are lower. And you can kind of see that in the picture. And so we have to clip it off at a higher level, which really affects the length of the straw strands. Sometimes people will go back and mow that straw stubble and rebale that. In organic farming, you'll get all that green material, which will cause it to rot. And so those bales become junk. So we don't typically do that unless we've had really good luck with our weed control. But the biggest effect on the length of the straw strands is how high we can clip it off with the combine. And so wheat versus straw, these are what we currently see per bushel and per bale. A bushel is 60 pounds. And so we are lucky if we get between 0 and 60 bushels to an acre. And same with bales, about 50 bales to an acre would be a good yield. And so you can see that a bale is going for about half the cost of a bushel. And if you're lucky, you could get a similar yield. Something that's kind of funny that we've all talked about is how this byproduct might actually become worth more than the wheat itself. We use composted chicken manure for fertilizing the land before we plant the wheat. And when we started, they would pay us to come haul that manure away. Now it's $1,300 a truckload, and the truck drivers all joke that the shit's worth more than the eggs. But anyway, growing grains is not very easy. It would be difficult for small farms to incorporate this crop just to yield straw. But it'd be interesting to see what everyone has to say about that. That's it.
All right. Hi, everyone. Ace McCarlton, and you want to introduce yourself?
Jacob Devarakusen.
Yeah. And we're from New Frameworks, and just so happy to be here with you all. So honored. Thank you so much for having us, both to the Architecture League and to Parsons School of Healthy Materials. We're just, thrilled. So thanks. All right. Well, we're going to get right into it. So Alex did a great job setting us up for the grounded nature of what we're going to talk about today. I think if I was asked to say what is one of the kind of main parts of what's gotten us into this pickle that John Sara spoke about very well, part of it is a lack of connection that we have to our land and to the places that we live. And when we speak about indigeneity, this is what is at the heart of any of us being indigenous to a place. It is being connected to land. So that is at the heart of the work that we are trying to do, is to bring that land connection back into all of our building processes. So connecting the place, the land, to the plants that are grown there and to the work that is happening on that land and to the food that we're eating. So John Sara noted I would introduce our bread table to everybody. So I would love it if everyone could. You could do it now if you really wanted to, if you're on the end, or if you want to do it at a break, when we're done. I would love for everyone to come and try. If you're not gluten-free, I am actually gluten-free, which is ironic, but this is wheat bread for those of you who cannot eat wheat. Although I will say that the local grains are a lot less hard on people's systems, so it depends on how strong your reaction is. But we have bread and we have butter for everyone to share, because I think that there is an embodied quality to this work that is what draws a lot of us to this. And I would argue probably many of us came for that reason, because this is about how do we connect and how do we feel this work in our bodies, because that is who we are as humans. We are of this earth. So the materials that we're interested in as natural builders in the Northeast, we have formed our work out of the fire of people asking, won't this material rot in the cold, wet Northeast? And so a lot of this work is about how do we utilize these natural materials in high performance ways. So that's what we're going to talk about, is kind of going from the field and the plant to a high performance building material that can connect us and also can last and perform in the ways that we need our materials to perform. So the wheat straw, we just did, a great introduction there. We received those straw bales from Aurora Farm, from the Nitty Gritty Grain Company. David drives up in his truck, he backs up. This is our shop in Essex Junction, Vermont. And we toss the bales into the back of our shop and begin to build with them. We thought we'd take a moment just to introduce the other materials that we use in our panels, because it's not just straw. We also use lumber for framework, and in our pre-designed modular buildings, we use local Vermont lumber as well. The species are eastern hemlock, western pine, and spruce trees. And the sawmills that we work with are local sawmills that are sustainably managing woodlots, often for generations in the area. This is a photo from our shop. Also, you can see the bales in the background on that right photo. And this is just giving you more of a sense of what is this panel? How do we take straw and what other materials are we utilizing to create a structure for that material? So you can see the framing material coming together on the right. This is a picture of us working on a roof panel. And this is Antonio and Avelia in our shop. And on the left, you can see the panels stacked ready for transport. And what's kind of fun to notice here is you get a really nice shot of the thermal break that we put between the double stud assembly. So the two studs here, and then this is actually a complementary wood insulation, wood-based insulation. If folks know of Timber HP, does anybody know of Timber HP? Show of hands. That's pretty good, half the people. So we now are so lucky to have wood fiber insulation production here in North America, coming out of Maine, utilizing C-grade wood from timber processing for insulation. So we're using wood fiber to break that thermal bridge there. And here's just a photo of what that wood fiber board material looks like. This is just pieces that we ripped, but I like it because you can really see the texture of the wood fiber. And it's amazing to work with this material. On the right, there is, that's an example of us spraying it, loose fill, into a cavity, utilizing our cellulose blower that we would use to blow dense packed cellulose. So we utilize this material in a bunch of different ways to complement the straw for areas that we need other kinds of insulation. This is a shot of our shop and applying clay and lime plaster. So we have, in our high-performance natural building journey, really understood how we can use minerals in complement with plant-based materials. And clay is the friend of straw. So that's like maybe just the fun thing to say. Clay is amazing. I could talk about it for so long, but I don't have time. But one of its wonderful properties is that it is very thirsty for water. It is hydrophilic. And so when it sits next to a plant-based material like straw, what it will do in the long run is just keep that straw super dry over the long term. And also, because it is extremely vapor permeable, it allows that vapor, any water that gets into the assembly for whatever reason, to evaporate into the air. It does not hold it, it does not lock it in. So one of the things that was a big challenge with buildings experiencing any forms of water failure in our climate were because they were plastered with cement and cement renders. So we've learned a lot about the use of these different pieces. So this shows us doing an awesome thing, which is getting to dump the plaster on from standing height rather than pick it up and put it onto a wall, which is what we always did when we were building these, not as prefabricated panels. So we're very happy about that. This is just a nice close-up shot of us having raked the plaster. This provides tooth so that when the panels do stand up and we add the top coat on site, it gives that something to cling to. This is like very old school plaster knowledge, from way back in the day. And both clay and lime, I will just say, are ancient binders that have been used all across the world in many different cultures. And we can talk more about lime. I know there was a cool question about lime's energy intensivity in terms of needing to be burned in order to become useful. So hopefully we'll get into that kind of nerd level later.
So looking more towards the design and fabrication, so New Frameworks is a worker-owned cooperative that has a bunch of different aspects to our company. In addition to manufacturing the panels and doing site work in the field, we work on existing buildings, and we also have a full-service architectural team in-house. So we do a lot of our own design work, and particularly for the sake of discussion around the panels, we do a lot of our own shop drawings and coordinate with architectural clients to make sure that as we are collaboratively dreaming up how to bring straw into these projects, so we can make sure that the design process is as smooth and integrated as possible. So a couple of photos here just to break things down a bit more, and I've seen some of the actual details of the panels themselves. In concept, we're basically looking at double stud boxes stuffed with straw, with a plane of sheathing on the exterior and an air barrier on the interior. We're looking at some examples of a clay and lime plaster that we use for our favored air barrier, but you'll also see plenty of examples in some upcoming photos of using vapor variable air, more typical conventional air barrier membranes as well. So the layout is kind of what you would expect if you've worked in modular before, if you're thinking of how would you use panels to make a form. Maybe one note here is all the window and door rough openings are built of the negative space around the panel headers and sill pieces and the pieces on the full full height pieces on the sides. So we're sort of using the panels to formulate both the positive and negative spaces required to substantiate the entire shell of a building. You can get a little sense on the right there of sort of some of the detailing. Not that you can really see those numbers too closely, but you can kind of get an impression of the detail that goes in on an individual level of really mapping out each panel. So when we bring this to the design process, we get very, very specific. We try to work to optimize designs, to standardize or minimize the number of different panels that are required. If you've got 17 different size windows that are scattered in mosaics around the walls, that's going to be significantly more expensive than sort of bringing some of that form into greater simplicity. So part of the process of bringing straw into buildings in a way that is streamlined and cost effective and more straightforward is incorporating the panelization process into the design workflow. So that's part of, as a design build cooperative, we can kind of bring some of that intention into the design process. And it gets as detailed as every single panel, gets a name, a code, if you will, and is individually cared for in its transition from the shop all the way onto site, again with the goal of minimizing the number of steps as much as absolutely possible so you don't have to pick up or put anything down more than necessary.
And so then this is just also a little shot of our shop, and this is the very, very simple tool that we started with. And I guess I'll just say for a second that one of our goals is to make this process as simple and replicable as possible, so that, you know, our goal is not to have complicated, expensive CNC equipment that is required for this. This is something that actually can be replicated and done quickly, because as we all know, we are in a climate emergency and we need people to replicate carbon storing and low carbon technology like as soon as possible. So part of this is just a super simple design. Our table that we build our panels on is essentially a plywood box on casters, so we can roll it around our shop. Our shop can be very flexible and movable. We have this framework that was created by a local metal worker in the city of Barrie in Vermont. And we essentially drew up these plans for him, and he bent it up for us. And the framework keeps the panel square, and we build inside of it so that it always creates the form, basically, for the panel and keeps everything square and tight in relationship to itself. So as we place the studs into the frame, then we pack it with the straw and go layer by layer until we get through the panel. And we can build panels up to 12 feet in height at this time, and then we can make them any size shorter than that is necessary. Some more photos from our shop. There's Marina and Jose in the foreground working on putting together and sort of squaring and finishing up a panel that's already been built. And then we have a team in the background, Antonio and Avelia, working on building the panel in the frame. And that's typically how we work. We have stations, so we have the building happening and then the finishing and squaring in those processes and those steps. And then this just gives you a sense of shipping and packing. So I know we looked at this photo before, and in this context, it's helpful to show how we stack the panels and get them ready for shipment. We are very intentional about the way that we pack and ship our panels. One, we don't use plastic and a bunch of kind of intense packaging to send them, but we make sure they're safe, and we can talk about how we do that, keep them dry during shipment. But we test our panels for moisture level when they leave our shop, and then when they're received on site, then they take those measurements again, so we make sure that everything is in a good zone in terms of moisture content for building. And we pack them in such a way that, if you remember the plan view drawing that Jacob showed with all of the panels around the building, we make our stacks in such a way so that when they're offloaded, they will make sense to the person who's installing it. So they'll start with a corner and be able to undo the stacks all the way around. And then loading up on a truck, we like to use Conestoga trailers, which have a big curtain that can basically expand out like an accordion across the top. And so it's a huge tarp that basically just covers the load at the end and then can be pulled back when it arrives on site. And that's a telescoping forklift, also called a telehandler. That's what we use to offload and move the panels around. So we don't need a crane. A lot of times people ask that. And the panels can actually be moved by hand. We recently had a partner on Martha's Vineyard who put up a set of panels, just picking them up and tipping them, by hand. So that can be done as well, which is cool.
So examples of what that looks like on site. We won't spend too much time so we can fit in a few more slides, but there they are going in. Again, they're sort of designed intentionally to be relatively maneuverable on site and be able to integrate into smaller projects without the overhead and logistics of larger lifting equipment. So that said, they can also serve for larger projects. I know the aspect looks a little funky. It's a fisheye view here. It's not actually a curved wall. But just to give some...
You can't do that.
You can do that if you're so inclined. This is an example of a commercial kitchen and dining facility. We're showing you what you can see sort of sticking up here are these large LVL splines that are designed to support a double stack commercial height wall that actually has cantilevered timbered porches hanging off the side. So in terms of the adaptability to more complex structural regimes and different building types, completely applicable to, you can bring whatever degree of structural engineering and complementary materials you need to be able to achieve some of these more complex buildings. And working with some mass timber LVL type products gives another interesting integration across the biomaterial palette, working with complementary wood products. Want to jump back in?
Yeah, so this was a project that we did for some farmers in our area. And basically what's fun about this is just seeing the way that when we do plaster the interior, which we do both that and other approaches as well, but when we do that, you can see the seams that are in between each panel. It's very much like drywall. You have to mud and tape the seams when you put it together. And then we put a finish coat over the top of that. So that's just a fun thing to check out. This is just another photo of a project, this one in Idaho, a collaboration with Love Shack Architects. And what's interesting about this one is just to show that sometimes we use complementary, as I mentioned before, flexible form insulation materials. Alex, you talked about it's a square bale. That's awesome when you have a shape that you're trying to fill that is also square. But when you don't, when you have something angled or something that's differently sized, it can get tricky to use straw. So we use a flexible form insulation. This is showing dense packed cellulose, but like I said, we've now started to use wood fiber fill as our main fiber insulation. And then what I was saying about that earlier one of taping the seams, you can see that's what that looks like then. So this is a project with the seams taped and ready to receive that top coat of lime finished plaster.
Just to spin through a couple more details, a little more of a close-up of what that rough opening looks like. You'll notice these horizontal girts that are in the interior of the panel there. This panel is not being plastered. It's going to receive a airtight vapor variable membrane and then an interior gypsum wallboard interior cladding. So those horizontal girts are used to keep the straw in compression during manufacturing, and then also becomes points of attachment for those additional materials, or if you have an interior service cavity. So we do have these. A lot of people wonder how you fasten things onto the straw, and there are challenges to that. And so there are some anchoring points built in during the process of the panel construction. This is from actually our very, very first panel project. So some of the details are a little outdated, but kind of the talking points here, we set up, we've improved the form of the track at the bottom of the wall, but these panels are very exact in their construction, but most slabs and foundation systems you walk onto are not. So we have a sort of a bottom plate, it's basically a double bottom plate, the first of which is installed directly in site to get to a level square form off of which the panels can sit without telescoping errors as you move your way up the height of the building. And in this case, they're going for a higher level of insulation and decided to wrap the walls with full insulation wrap of that wood fiber board. So you can see it again in application here as an exterior wrap for an ultra high performance wall assembly. just looking at a couple more of these details around the plaster system, the air barrier system. So we have been innovating ways of getting airtight connections from plastered skins to wood products for going on 10, 15 years now. We've tried lots and lots and lots of different things. You can do it in a very, very low tech and kind of like inexpensive mechanism to get a long-term air seal between those dissimilar materials. That said, it's awesome that they actually make tape for the purpose. So there are air sealing tapes that are fleece backed. They're designed to literally mud right into a plaster assembly. I'm a huge proponent of plaster as an air barrier system. It is visible and inspectable and flexible and durable, and you can repair it with a wide host of materials, and it manages moisture very well, and it can make it from a broad diversity of different localized materials. Pretty awesome relative to some of the like super technical, expensive, very, kind of more limited air barrier systems that are out there in the world. So when you have the opportunity, we love it. And this is just what some of those details are that we worked out over time to make sure we can ensure that we're not forsaking the integrity of the air barrier system in favor of the materials. That said, this would be an example of the same, but without a plaster assembly. So we've got a sort of typical vapor variable airtight membrane on the interior, and here, this is that same commercial facility, so we've built out a service cavity to be able to facilitate running wiring, kind of separate the trades in the field so that electricians aren't needing to get into the walls. When you're running condensate lines from heat pumps, you don't have to worry about in-wall connections.
Can I just quickly say something about that last one? And then if folks want to see an example of what that looks like, I noticed that's how the Croft panel was sent. So that little square panel there that's sitting on the floor with the black, if you look to the interior, the part that's facing us right now is the exterior, but on the inside, they sent it with a service cavity to the interior. So you can get a feel for what that looks like.
And just some more elegant detailing on the plaster. We're a big fan of the system, and again, there's a thickness to plaster, so there's a little more design intention that's required to make sure that everything lands the way you'd like it to. It need not be super expensive. When we apply plaster, it's relatively at cost parity with finished drywall systems, as long as those details are considered in advance. And the Eurotrim approach of just using the extension jam to give a nice landing point to the plaster is an example of how to dial that in quickly and efficiently.
Okay. Yeah, okay. So so this is an example of one of the buildings that we've created through our Casitas program. We designed some small modular buildings using the straw panels as a base. And so to ask the question of how do we start with the field and move through to the form, we realized that though we could continue to be custom builders, it didn't make as much sense because we want to build on the straw panel basis and that modular element and be able to create designs with our own in-house team that really fit with that logic of that form. So the other thing that I can point out here is the exterior here is a rain screen siding using local wood that I mentioned before. And the reason we do that, we can plaster on the exterior, but it tends to be a little bit, it's just a different maintenance regime and it requires different overhangs and different things. So we wanted something that was very replicable and again, achievable by many people in many settings. There's just another cute picture of the Cabanita in the snow. And this one's just a great one to say, these Casitas that we've designed are all electric, they're super high performance, they're airtight, vapor open in their approach, using all local and non-toxic materials, really prioritizing human health and ecosystem health. We are using these for accessory dwelling units, infill housing, and trying to even put together things like multi-units, stacking them together, conjoining them for multi-unit applications. Again, just other shots of the interior, and I think just noting, ventilation is super important also in terms of air quality and human health, and then all of these materials being, organic, local, and non-toxic to people. Same thing with all the wood that we use, the wood finishes that we apply are also non-toxic finishes. Yeah. I don't know, what more to say? So then this is a rendering of our largest. So we just created this, like, I don't know, 3 months ago or something. So this is the 900 square foot. The casitas have a 300, a 400, a 600, and a 900 square foot unit. And this is our 900 that has 2 bedrooms. And we're just having so much fun with this. And yeah.
All right, so just to wrap up on a few points on context here. So we really strongly believe in the power of residential construction to make a really large impact. We use these panels in non-residential applications as well, but our roots are in residential construction. When you look at the average material carbon intensity of a North American residence, you multiply that out by the amount of square footage of low-rise residential construction built in 2017. The emissions from that in the material basis alone are larger than the entire emissions of Finland, Bulgaria, Hungary, Sweden, Norway. So this is the scale that we get to intervene in when we're working down to a small scale. We tend to think of industrialized materials and industrialized scale buildings as being the place to lean into, and we believe there is a sort of a horizontal replicability of improvement that can really move the needle on this scale when it's dispersed in such a wide format across across our continent. And so our approach to scale is not to actually become as large of a company as possible. We find it's a lot more effective for us to port information than technology, and so we're now working with cohorts of other companies that are interested in developing their own panel manufacturing processes and trying to help build a network of panel manufacturers in various other regions. One, so you won't have to ship to Idaho, and two, so that in every state we've got multiple different panel producers working with the materials from that state and providing housing solutions within that region. So that is our approach for trying to address scale at this level while still holding on to the quality and sort of culture of being a smaller organization. And just to give a few other pieces, just sort of building a little bit of data bona fides behind that, we are, one of my other hats is developing the BEAM tool, which is a material carbon emission tool. If you want to talk about embodied carbon nerddom, come find me the drink later. Really excited to be able to put data to this to be able to both validate and optimize the carbon storage benefits of working with straw. We work with straw for a number of reasons, one of which is the most effective way of storing atmospheric carbon that has been photosynthesized into materials into a building. There's no better material that we've found to be able to do that. So in the Terra, the building that Ace just showed, almost 6 metric tons of carbon are stored in those bale walls in that 900 square foot building, which yields a building that is storing 3 tons of carbon in all of its primary materials. So that's the numbers behind that approach. And so for us, what that means is, whereas our current approach to architecture is to design a building, look for the materials and extract them to provide the building, and then green building is trying to extract less harmfully. Our approach here in working with straw is to look at what are the resource flows coming out of sustainably managed forests and agricultural systems. How can we take those resource flows, turn them into products, and then design architecture around that product basis, which puts us into a much more humble and collaborative relationship with the ecosystems that we are required to be able to sustain the development of the built environment. So by sort of shifting that model around field to form, not what can we extract for the form we want, but how can we manifest beauty and form out of the resources that are available to us. That's the logic behind why we're continuing to work with this material. And that logic extends far beyond just working with a technocratic solution. So yes, we could just be happy working with straw, but for us, how we're working and how we the actual process of the work matters too. And so there's an internal and external part for that. For us, being a cooperative has a really important social value for us in being able to not just provide jobs and careers, but actually pathways to ownership for all of the members of our team, many of whom would be disenfranchised from company ownership within most other sectors of our economy. But also the value of the existence of our company has been built off of weathering the transition to being a manufacturer, weathering the disruption of COVID, weathering the recession. We relied on a cooperative structure to help pull us through some of those really difficult times. So it's literally a form of a resilience for us in being able to continue to do innovative work in this space. Looking externally, those same values we find in working with folks like Nitty Gritty Grain. They are protecting land in one of the most gentrified and development pressured areas in our state. They are in a critical part of the the watershed for Lake Champlain, which is under tremendous threat from agricultural runoff. So supporting sustainable agriculture in that region is critical. And as we mentioned, it's very difficult to find grain producers in our region. So being able to invest in keystones of our food system within our region, all those are amplifying benefits of choosing to work with this material that are sort of part and parcel of why we're built in on this work. We're almost done.
So then the last straw, we've got a couple of issues over there that folks should be welcome to flip through and take a look at. Essentially, this is amazing. This was a periodical that serves the straw bale building community that recently put out a whole issue on panelization and straw. And the fact that we can see that there are straw bale panel producers that are all over the globe and see where they are is just incredible. This is a really amazing new moment that we're in, and really a rising tide of people asking for how to build with biogenic and plant-based materials. And I believe we have Peter from EcoCocon here, Peter Jensen. Yay, hi Peter. And EcoCocon brought a panel as well, and Croft, who's based in Maine, and we're based in Vermont. And then we have Greg Bossy here from Rare Forms. They're based in Massachusetts, and they're part of our SEED program, one of our cohorts, participants in our cohorts this year. So just seeing this grow, like, I want to look at this and be here with all of you in 5 years, and this is just a colorful dot of beauty. That's what I want to see. So the Northeast Bio-Based Materials Collective, we'll just really briefly talk about that. And if anybody's interested in checking out the report, there is a QR code in the corner. Back in the fall, in November 15th, we partnered with Mass Design and why am I totally afraid? Thank you, Half Climate Design, to gather a bunch of folks from across the Northeast to answer the question, how can we scale plant-based and bio-based materials and bring them to scale quickly and rapidly to meet the challenges that we all know we're facing. And we felt it was most effective to do that cross-sectorally, so folks from places outside of the just strict building, the AEC, the architecture, engineering and construction industry, and really bring in, policy folks, government folks, folks in academia, all across, because we need creative ideas. We need to answer these questions in a broader way. So if anyone's interested in learning about this collective, we are bringing everyone in that we can and working with a bunch of working groups to solve questions and really move this forward.
I want to give a shout out to John Sauer and the Healthy Materials Lab for being part of that initiative. They were in the original summit. So yeah, this is truly collaborative. All right, last slide here. So where we're moving to with this is positioning this work within a larger movement beyond just a technology stack here. We started this work as little individuals and riding on the shoulders of other small individuals trying to figure this out over the course of the last 20, 30, 40 years in modern context. And most of them didn't make it and couldn't make a business model from it, as it's quite difficult. However, enough of us have bound together in associations, regional associations around this work. We've developed best practices and enough stability in the work that we've now been able to mature to the point that we can bring pre-manufactured products to the market in partnership with engineering and architectural teams and build enough of a community of practice around this work to give some legitimate solutions to how this can be implemented at scale. As we're seeing a transition from a fossil-based energy economy towards a renewable energy economy, we believe really strongly the material basis of that needs to follow suit. And so accordingly, for those of us that are still working in the kind of conventional industry, working with the materials that are sort of in decline and antithetical to the continuity of human existence on the planet, to be able to figure out how to build a bridge from that material basis towards the materials that are sort of part and parcel of the backbone of a regenerative economy to the future. We're building this bridge right now, and we look forward to seeing you along the way. Thank you for your time.
great to be here. So I'm going to dive right in and kind of pick up on what was already said. Not only are we kind of dealing with the problem of the toxicity, the carbon emissions, and the reliance on petrochemicals, but we've also kind of gotten into a position where we're building a lot more than we need, particularly for houses. So houses have scaled up dramatically from 1950 to 2020, and a lot of this is a product of the fact that that thin sandwich, and architects become obsessed with the exterior finish and the interior. They're not so concerned about the inside, and I will blame ourselves in our past formation being in that camp. But in a sense, we don't look as closely as we need to all of these multiple layers that exist. And the fact that we've inherited this system that involves incredible quantities of lightweight, thin, single-performing, kind of sterile layers that largely produce a strict binary between interior and exterior. And there's other ways to go about it. And I think this is architecturally super interesting to wrap your head around. So what are the ways in which we might look at single materials or monomaterials, thickness, ways to kind of engage a totally different way to assume a relationship to the kind of built assembly. So these are samples of some of the projects that we looked at in our book. And largely they go to an argument that says that we've kind of inherited this legacy of modernism based on these materials that positions the architecture essentially as a kind of consumer, and we really need to move to a model where maybe heavy things that are thick, regenerative materials, positioning architects in the design to be more engaged in the material cycles. That this is really a paradigmatic shift. It's not just simply a shift of substitution. And so that was the basis of the 55 houses that we looked at in this book. It was organized according to different chapters of dominant materials. And it's interesting to note that of the plant-based or the biogenic materials, really only hemp and straw grow quickly. So CLT and mass timber is not going to save us. It's certainly better than steel and concrete, but we have to look at other models. And it has been mentioned, straw is extraordinarily important into this context. It doesn't displace agricultural crops, as has been mentioned. It's essentially a kind of a residue of a food system that's already in place. It is everywhere. It's ubiquitous. And there's an anecdote, and I'm not even sure if it's true, but it's a great anecdote, which is that the amount of carbon sequestered in straw worldwide is equal to the amount of carbon emissions of concrete. I don't know if it's true, but it's great. And even if it's partially true, it's a fantastic, so in other words, it's at a scale that's really significant, and that's what we need to capitalize on, right? And the issue is, how do we store this in the buildings? And more importantly, are there ways that this would transform how we even think about the design? What are the ways in which buildings might need to be able to capitalize on this? What's the architectural invention that could come from this? So we've looked at just kind of moving quickly, when you translate straw into building form, there are certain known models. The prefabricated panel we've heard about. There's also the ability to place it in an existing wood frame. Again, not letting it be the structure, but there's also, in fact, one of the origins of the use of straw is as a load-bearing insulation, the so-called Nebraska load-bearing frame. This dates back to the late 1800s, when balers were first being made available, and a lack of access to other building materials. And there's some buildings that still exist, 100 years old. And it should be said that not only does straw have a kind of long lifespan, a long history, but it's also recently been codified in IRC and code. California Straw Building Association and others need to be heartily thanked. I highly recommend this book. But one of the interesting things that comes out of this is to try to think, what are the impacts on how we might go about kind of working with this material? And so we become very interested in the load-bearing insulative capacity of, say, jumbo straw. And this is a project by Atelier Schmidt, uses 30-inch by 50-inch by 100-inch, 650-pound jumbo bales that are then tied together with ring beams of CLT, but it's essentially load-bearing, and produces this super thick insulation structural blanket that contains about 84,000 kilograms of CO2. It's a kind of fascinating change to what we expect architecturally. This led to, and I should say, the research on the manual led to us wanting to design 5 biogenic houses, which we did. After 4 years of looking at other people's work, you kind of want to design your own, so we did. 2 of the ones I'll present today are based on straw. And we worked with an amazing team of people, but I have to mention Kyle Reich and Celia Chesabel, who were instrumental in both of these two books. So the straw bale spiral house is essentially, it's a very small scale, but it combines CLT with a very kind of thick donut, if you will, of straw. It's basically trying to make a series of prefabricated CLT boxes that then get placed into a thickness of straw. Essentially, the house has a kind of wall of double stack of jumbo bales around it. Space is removed in which is then positioned the 4-sided CLT prefabricated panels that constitute the room. So in a sense, you get a room that fills the thickness of the walls. We have a large overhang roof to protect the plaster, and then also a kind of skylight to bring light down into the middle of the donut. But effectively, the rooms spiral around this space. So in a sense, it's as the wall and the rooms are identical. They're synthetic with each other. So you get this super thick building, but also very porous, very open. The space that's produced from it, we think is unprecedented in some respects because it's reliant upon this excess of thickness that's made possible through straw. Mass Straw House does something similar, looks at the ability to develop design a project that is more mass than it is space. And here this was done with 2 different systems of straw bales. One is a stacked wall. They would run perpendicular to the contours. They would slowly kind of curve away. And adjacent to that would be a plinth or a kind of a zone, a thickness, if you will, of straw bales stacked up and then carved to produce space. The space between them effectively is the space of the main living and dining area, and these 2 straw assemblies are tied together with a series of wood box beams that are then infilled with straw. A membrane is placed on top, and then another layer of straw is left on top of that, essentially as a kind of way to sponsor a green roof. And a nod out to the 3 Little Pigs' anxiety about straw, we said, all right, let's let it just decompose, be part of the flora and fauna of the site. Spatially, though, the project is really kind of this interstice between these 2 straw systems, but also then the private rooms that are nested within the thickness. So you get the living area, the stacked kind of gathering places, and then into this thickness are the access to the 2 bedrooms and the bathroom, each of which have their own skylight. They're amazingly acoustically autonomous from the rest of the house, so which if you live in a New York City apartment, you really want to have. So this was a way of imagining a very different approach to the efficiency that's so dominant in the way in which we think about materials. What happens if there's a way that we could start using a kind of level of excess to produce a very different model of a building? So we've been really interested in figuring out what are the other consequences of working with jumbo bales, and in particular looking at the kind of round jumbo bale, and how might this again be a kind of different catalyst for architectural invention. They're relatively cheap, and if you stack them 3 high around a space that's about 75 by 75, it's about $1.75 a square foot. Obviously, there's no skins and roof, but that's still pretty cheap, right? So, but it lends itself to a kind of interesting possibility that one could make the entire site a thickness of straw. You could start carving, you could design through other models, you could remove things, you could develop rooms and corridors in fundamentally different configurations. You could have columns that become walls, columns that cluster to form different aggregations, very different spatial organizations, and then with a slab of CLT as a floor, one could stack these up to produce a building model whose kind of tectonics are really, just not what we're used to. Becomes something akin to a hypostyle hall, but ultimately built out of straw. Now, if one looks at this in more detail, the ability to kind of clad it with membranes, a rain screen on the outside, wood slats on the inside, we started thinking this is actually pretty interesting as a tectonic. What happens if we went back to one of our past projects and reimagined it? If it had to go through the filter of straw, or jumbo round straw bales, what would happen? So this was a project we built a couple of years ago in Arkansas. It's an early childhood education project, about 240 children, very young age, to age 5, so the relationship between the classrooms and the play spaces outside was crucial. This was done in collaboration with the Parsons Healthy Material Lab, and it was used used no plastics. It was as good as we could get. Developed these interstitial spaces where kids could play, these large porches, but it was dependent upon working with conventional materials, studs, drywall, etc. We didn't use latex paint, we used mineral-based paint, and we did what we could, right, to spatially. But I think it would be so much more interesting if we had run it through with the capacity of thinking about straw. In part, we could imagine each of these rooms being basically an array of straw bales that then would each sponsor a beam that would form a reciprocal structure leading to a skylight in the middle of the rooms. These rooms would have thick walls that kids could climb in and inhabit, and then those walls could extend to the outside, and the bales themselves could start to frame the exterior space and be absolutely synthetic with the play spaces. Kids could play on the walls, in the walls, around the walls. Each of these rooms would be adjoined through a bathroom, and then they would form a kind of heart-shaped kind of collective with two classes of similar age children feeding to an exterior play space. So we liked the fact that it happened to produce a heart that was non-intentional. We did not diagram the heart, but it worked out. It's the consequences of working with straw. You end up with heart-shaped plans. Is that true? So anyway, but that's only if you use the jumbo. But if you work with linear bales, and we ran this through, if you did linear bales, you end up with a more a linear project, but you get and I won't go through the details, but the diagram is there, right? So again, it's a super interesting way to work with kind of thickness. Okay, so the last thing I want to go over is that we became very interested in the possibility of making a load-bearing installation that would hold, in a sense, through binders and not be reliant on the stud frame. So to get there, we kind of said, all right, let's actually try to develop a system that would allow us to compress straw with a range of different binders, really to test a material. We weren't making blocks per se, we were trying to test material by aggregating them into a form with the assumption that we could start forming or molding panels that would be much bigger. So even though what you see us making are blocks, the goal is not necessarily a block, but actually a larger scale system. And the key was, of course, the binder, because if you're compressing, the beauty is you get the compression allowing the straw to work structurally. It significantly improves the fire performance. It chars, it doesn't burn, like mass timber in some respects. But we still retain the insulative value that's within the cells of the straw. So we're able to get this holy grail of structural insulation. So rather than showing you slides, I think I just have a video going through this. And this is kind of looking at how we went through a range of different binders from glues to earth to limes to mycelium, which didn't work at all because it couldn't penetrate into the depth. We developed a compression machine. Croft was instrumental in advising us on the compression machine, using 2 truck winches to get about 28,000 pounds of force, and basically compress straw with different binders into molds so we could hold the tension while the binder was drying. So it worked out very well, but certainly the drying time was a bit of an issue. And here you see the mycelium, looking at the unboxing of the different components. So we went through about 20 different materials, including a series of just SIPs, basically OSB and of course the chainsaw comes out because it makes for great videos. But you end up with this ability to look at really dense, 163 kilograms per meter cubed,
We would then take the units, had to cut them into smaller chunks, unfortunately, to be able to test them on the Instron. It's a really interesting performance. There's no horizontal deformation. It takes on increasing load. It doesn't fail. So you get this ability to take on more and more load as it deforms. The thermal tests were also super positive. Actually, they were too good. They were getting an R3, R4, which is way too good. So we know that the test is flawed. But it's interesting. We're trying to get an R value reading off straw is really difficult. But nonetheless, we're super excited by the possibility of imagining a kind of different way to work. There are a number of people working in this arena, and what's fascinating is to see where this is going to go. That we're looking through, it has a long history, but its innovation needs to continue to accelerate. And more importantly, from an architect standpoint, thinking about ways you can kind of change the basic premise of how buildings are designed. There are great opportunities that are possible. We're extremely excited by straw because it's the material that can scale to sequester carbon in a way unlike any other material. So thank you very much for being here. So.
So I'm going to invite our speakers up. I feel jittery, so excited. To join us on the panel, and while we're doing that, you're welcome to go and have a piece of bread and butter. Eat the straw as we go. The idea here is to have a conversation between farmers, the builders, the architects, and see if we can ignite a new future. I'm going to posit some questions, hopefully spark some conversation, and then leave time for your questions. So please jot down for the meeting. You all have microphones, and there's a little switch there, so turn it on.
Hello.
Check, check.
I don't know. I'm so excited, but I think because it just feels possible. I don't know, specifically, somehow tonight it feels possible. Because obviously we're interested in how we scale this and how we get more regenerative building products into our system quickly. What Ace said, it's urgent. We're in a climate emergency. This is an urgent situation. And we know that we can use the power of design and construction of the built environment to ignite this change. We know that that's possible. We know that design can make that happen. And that we are, as architects, designers, contractors, farmers, we have the power to change the future of our environment because we are essentially consumers. And what we consume drives change. So the big question that we all are always asking is like, how do we scale this? How do we really scale this? And what are the consequences of this scaling? And what if the New York City housing crisis was addressed with straw in a big way? You guys have all like ignited this energy around like what's possible. I don't know if this is a downer, but I guess the first question is like, what are the biggest challenges that you see to scaling straw as the viable ingredient? And I think we could see it from all of your perspectives. You could jump in if you have an answer. There's no downsides.
I'll go for it. Okay. The biggest challenge to scaling straw, let's see. I mean, there's so many. I think one of them we're tackling tonight and continuing to tackle, which is education. I think a lot of people, I don't know if people would raise their hands for this or not, but how many people here know or knew before tonight the difference between hay and straw? Okay, that's really pretty good. Like, it looks like about half the room, which, I would say most people don't. And that's pretty important because when we're talking about building with plant-based materials, we actually have to be thoughtful about what those materials are. We have to understand them. And I spoke earlier about like relationships and embodiment and place-based practices. and how a lot of us have lost land-based practices and that awareness and that knowledge. And so part of it is about remembering how to know in an intimate way the materials that we are in relationship with in our land and in our place, in a way that then we can actually work with them in a serviceable and intelligent and helpful way. And so that's the thing about the hay straw thing, is that if you don't know the difference between hay and straw, and you might think that they're kind of sticks of one half dozen of another, you actually are really missing a very key piece. And there's a reason why, I think we were just talking about this, like there's a reason why if people might not know the difference between hay and straw, they might actually have a darn good reason to think that it would rot or decompose, or that mice might eat it, or that, you know, any of these things, because the high nitrogen content of that material is meant to be a food. It's not meant to be insulation that lasts for 100 years. So that's one example of, I think, a major barrier that we're facing is simply, I mean, and it's actually both simple and not, because, you know, I don't recall who said it, it may have been John Sara, but like, we're literally talking about, no, I think it was you, Paul, talking about, you know, just, this is a systems change. This is a very deep change that we're talking about, which is about how do we understand our relationships with ourselves, with place, with ecology, with plants. Like, this is a big deal. So I think that's actually, if I was to boil it down, probably the biggest challenge that we're facing is that sea change that we all need to engage with.
I want to ask a quick question of you, of New Frameworks. You wanted to scale, and to scale, you moved to a double stud system that inserts straw into it. How have you come to that, and why does that allow you to, why is that the decision to do it? So it's a soft question, but I want you to, like, why are you doing double stud systems with straw? So.
Like, sort of as opposed to some of the really cool things that you were
yeah,
sharing, which
yeah,
I
yeah.
love,
I mean,
by the way.
I mean, I kind of
Love
know,
them.
I kind of know why,
You
but,
know
but
why.
it's a way to scale now, right? So.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's it. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's just very practical. I mean, it's what we knew and it's what was available. You know, the jumbo bales that you showed some of those examples, those, I mean, maybe Alex, you can speak to this, but I've never seen one of those in Vermont. So,
Yeah,
go.
we have very few of those. We have a lot of people doing round bales, but the big squares is what we call them. Very few people have the equipment to run a machine of that size.
Right, so the practicality of just, this is what we were building with. You know, we were building on a residential scale for the most part, you know, small commercial things as well in our area, but that's what's available, readily available on the market, easy to lift and work with, you know, as a single person, you know, so yeah, I think that's why. Turn it down, I think.
Check, check. Thank you. On a more practical basis, the reason we're working with double stud right out the gate is similar to one of the greatest challenges. It's a recognizable structural system using you know, that we could immediately transition into the market. So we chose not to take the model of garnering large amounts of investment and taking multiple years for product development and R&D and investing in code change and code you know, manipulation, or not in a negative way, but you know, development, if you will, so on and so forth, to bring a new product to market. We wanted to bring a product to market immediately and make a transition within our company, like in real time. And this was our direct path towards doing that. I personally, I don't know if we've talked about this as a company, but I personally don't see the double stud module as being like by any means the end. And I think there's a lot of inefficiency that comes from that. There's a lot of excess use of material that's just not necessary to achieve what's critically required. But we feel pretty proud of being able to like very, very rapidly bring a new product to market and then iterate from that space and help that be one more step off of which others can continue to innovate and develop. One of the biggest challenges we have is a regulatory and economic and academic and research sort of system, like large system that doesn't either see the value behind this material nor provide ease of opportunity to bring that material into the structure without having to invest heavily in its change, which is something we're working on too, but that's long game. We don't necessarily have a long game to wait for those changes to come before we could bring anything to bear. So I call this maybe a transitional approach.
I love that.
I mean, that was kind of a leading question, Paul. So,
It was a good one.
let's, well, I mean, like, I think it leads to that question of, what's normative, what's going to be accepted now, like you're saying, it's an emergency, what we can do now. But what are the possibilities? It leads to what are the possibilities? And Alex, when you say, well, we have the equipment to make these square bales, what if you had equipment to make, I don't know, like maybe the equipment is designed, what if this equipment to harvest the hay is designed specifically for a builder's bale, or rather than building with bales that are kind of historically been designed for whatever reason for the farm, that we build equipment that's designed for building. That's not the square bale, but I don't know if that was towards your leading question.
Yeah, I mean, look, one analogy could be made that the straw bale was not meant for building, right? And so in the same way in which a log dropped in the forest was not meant to make a perfect house as a log cabin. So it's very rudimentary as a basis, but the time to innovate is really short, as has been mentioned. So, but I think one of the interesting questions is, what are the ways in which one could use this phenomenal material through certain processes? And the problem is it involves investments, it involves time, and to be able to make products and materials that are actually fundamentally different than what we currently have. And I think that's where kind of design, innovation, industrial design, material science has to come in and is coming in to think about different binders, ways that heat, minimal amounts of heat can form a kind of bond within the straw, et cetera. That's going to be, in some ways, the straw bale is not the end, it's the beginning of the process, right? So, but trying to accelerate quickly to what are the other directions. The other thing from an architectural standpoint is to think about the difference between materials as substitutions for existing, assemblies and logics, and really taking them on as an opportunity for different models altogether. And I think that you can look at the transition of modernism, working with steel and concrete, and certainly a lot of the houses that were meant to look like concrete we know weren't in the 20s, et cetera. So I think that same kind of question, like what are the architectural potentials and innovations, and frankly kind of different paradigms that are going to come about, but those paradigms also have to go beyond the object of the building, right? Have to go into much larger cycles, which is also super interesting. But that's where things get really intriguing. The substitution model is the first step, but I think the other ones are much more interesting. So.
That's true. Right. What can we adopt right now? And that's what you guys are doing, which is amazing. But what's the potential for the people in this room? Like, what's the potential? And then what are the roadblocks to that potential? I mean, I think that's also a piece of it. Which leads to that question, like if 50 of these people sitting here said, okay, I'm going to go back to my studio or my firm tomorrow and we're going to design our next project made of straw, what are the kinds of technical information, what do we need to know in order to do that? What kind of technical information? And do we all need to live next to nitty-gritty? Like,
please don't.
Well, I think there's so much. I mean, starting from how do you know what a building quality, at least in our case, straw bale is. I mean, I think if people are looking to use other forms, like get into blocks or, use round bales, there are other things that can come into play. With working with the straw bale material, I spoke about percentage of moisture content and dryness. Like that is an important thing, which is super important to farmers too. You could speak to that. I mean, there's a really good reason that you don't want your straw bales to be wet and that you bale your straw when it's going to be dry and, seasonally and temperature. And it's because we don't want to build in construction moisture into that material. So that's a technical piece that's important. We spoke a little bit about the length of straw in Alex's presentation. At least the way we're using straw, and again, that's not in a chopped form, although I bet you were using long straws for your blocks that you were creating, because long straws are actually super important structurally. They knit together and make the whole form work, and that's true for us too. We have found accidentally when we use some shorter chopped straw put into bale form, that it is much weaker and falls apart. And even when it's baled, it doesn't do what we need it to do structurally. So that was a really interesting piece that we started talking about in terms of, and I guess this also jumps a little bit on climate and climate change and climate crisis, because Vermont faced, as many of you may remember, a really bad flood last summer. We had major flooding in our state, and Aurora and Nitty Gritty were hit, and their crop was hit. So they actually did not have a crop of straw for us last summer, and David worked to find another source, and some of that source that he got for us was chopped twice in the way that you described. Folks probably went back and mowed that second cut and baled that up. And we didn't realize until we've recently been working with that is actually way inferior in terms of stability. So I think there's a lot of things from length of straw to, from moisture content and the context with which that straw was grown. I mean, you spoke a lot about how organic farming, kind of changes some of the practices and what's possible in terms of how that material is harvested. Those are a few things I can throw out.
One thing I want to touch on that I forgot to mention is there are two different ways that you can grow wheat. One is you can plant it in the spring. It's called springtime wheat. And then you have overwinter wheat, which is what we do. We plant it in the fall. And what you want that crop to do is grow a little bit, and then it goes dormant. And if you get a good snow covering, that's even better because it insulates it. But a huge problem we're having with climate change is that we get these freeze-thaw cycles in the winter now, and it's stunting the growth of the plant overall. And that's going to affect the length.
I mean, I guess the other technical considerations in the application we're using it right now is as an insulation material. So R value, fire performance, its relationship with moisture. What's really, as you can sort of see from the partnership that we use straw with other bio-based insulation materials, is they're pretty complementary, and there's a degree of predictability. There's also plenty of testing at this point to have enough understanding of the virtues and liabilities around straw's thermal performance and behaviors with moisture that can make designing with that material more predictable than when we started our work. In general, it's one of the most moisture tolerant insulation materials we've worked with outside of mineral wool. It's fantastic in that regard, but it's the sort of thing that wouldn't necessarily be intuitive. Everyone has a story about a rotten bale, and yeah, sure. Everyone has also a story around a rotting log, and we have a whole lot of built infrastructure made out of wood that has not just all expired because it rots. So if we can figure out how. Exactly. So as retrofit contractors, do a lot of decarbonization of existing buildings, and it is highly notable how incredibly resilient straw construction is relative to many of the other more conventional walls that we've had to dig into over the course of the last 50 years. So yeah, I mean, I think those properties are important to know, and I think particularly I would say in our region, moisture, because that's the greatest threat to buildings in the Northeast. So having an understanding of what the vapor profile of a wall is, what the absorption capacity of the material is, how to design to its strengths and minimize its weaknesses is maybe one of the biggest risk management approaches there. If you're out west, it'd be about fire. And fortunately, straw is also incredible with fire too. It passed an E85 flame and smoke spread rating for an unplastered bale face. Like you're mentioning, it chars before it really fully ignites. So it's got all of those benefits, but the technical knowledge around them needs to be known as any material would for a novel material brought into a design practice.
So, Paul, in your few years of looking at straw, what do you think are the hurdles to bring straw to here to New York City? Either retrofit. I mean, retrofit's a great option, or new.
Yeah, I mean, certainly in New York City, one of the difficulties is the thickness becomes a cost, right? Because every square inch becomes a kind of consideration. So one is, can straw be compressed to be an insulative at a performance level that is within the tolerance accepted, that now has been set by these super high performing, highly toxic, highly flammable materials, right? So I think that's certainly one of the issues in the urban setting. I think a lot of it just comes down to familiarity, willingness to work with it, cost. I mean, it's the same thing. We need,
all of the partners that are going to be fabricating straw panels to be everywhere in every state, and cost is going to come down, right? So I think that all of those factors play a key role, but I would argue that probably the lack of knowledge is the first one and the easiest one to overcome with proper information. So that's because the more you find out about straw, the more you realize that most of the anecdotes associated with straw don't actually hold true. So the negative ones. Yeah. Exactly. The good ones. Yeah.
And Alex, if that were to happen, if there was this demand, what do you think would be the ripple effect in the agricultural community?
That's a great question. I mean, as long as everyone's still eating wheat or needing flour, there's going to be straw. But how much of that is being used now currently, and how much is left over for builders to be able to use? It's a great question. I have no idea what the answer is.
I mean, is there a lot of excess straw? I mean, obviously, New Frameworks is buying a lot of your straw, but otherwise, is there a lot of excess on your?
When we've had really, really high yield years, we still go through all of it. So there's a pretty good demand for it, for sure. And we've done a lot of work with, there's a Gardner Supply Company, there's a chain up there, and they'll buy a couple thousand bales a year, and it's just for people to take home to use in their garden. So there's definitely a strong demand for it.
Can I speak to that just a little bit? So there's an interesting, the resource studies we've looked at globally show that there is a huge glut of straw as a resource, but a lot of that is being produced from conventional agricultural practices that are somewhat antithetical to the goals of building with straw in the first place as it relates to toxicity. You mentioned the residue contamination or pesticide application. There's a host of other environmental issues that come with conventional modes of straw production. So I think there's that sort of the first order question of if this was a demand-driven sort of direction, would there be enough straw? I think the immediate answer is yes, at least for the foreseeable future, depending on how quickly we all start working with straw, but I'm not that optimistic. So I think as a residue, there is plenty right now. What we get really excited about is, you mentioned we are all consumers, and we see billions of dollars worth of consumer power that we as specifiers, anyone who's in the world of specification, my Lord, do you have a lot of power in terms of where to direct just millions of dollars of purchasing power in a given large building. If a sliver of that can be directed towards investing in sustainable and regenerative agricultural practices, then we can sort of get into the third or fourth order questions of how can we partner collaboratively with other industries to better manage land, to better manage agricultural outcomes, and provide some of the investment in agriculture that's currently having to compete on a commodity basis, sort of the same way that we're having to compete with commodity building development, that just economically disincentivizes doing something better because the market is blind to those values. So there is how we get from here to there, I think, starts by using residues. I think it then moves into providing additional value support for sustainably managed farms, and I think it can ultimately move towards purpose-grown crops that are literally as you're talking about, how would this be baled for a building? Well, wow, what if the building industry could invest in brownfields, reclamation projects that are really designed to build soil that have some residues coming from it that were residues designed and intended for the insulation or the pressed, MDF board product or whatever other product we want to develop from that. So I think if we scaffold the transition from what we're doing right now towards what series of economic transition would look like across multiple industries, that's where then we get really exciting about the architectural form vision with, okay, I'll stop.
That's great.
No, but I do think that a driver for this is architectural curiosity and imagination, and frankly, a way that design brings a seduction to something that is seen as a 19th century construction technology often, right? So what are the ways in which design produces a model that this is now super interesting, which it is.
No, your description of thickness and challenging the thinness of modernity is very intriguing. It feels like, oh, right, there's this whole opportunity that's not dependent on typical construction materials, and that's super exciting.
And I'll just add super briefly that Chris Magwood, our friend and colleague, always was noting that the thicker wall, which people always saw as a downside. Well, how thick are these walls going to be? Not only are there all kinds of opportunities that you alluded to with like children playing in them in these spaces and how that creates really interesting things, but additionally, we're storing more carbon. So like that's a really fun one. If we're looking at the built environment as like our 6th global carbon sink that we can introduce as like a human-generated carbon sink to help redress our horrible mistake of burning all the fossil fuels that we're now dealing with, if we can help to heal and solve our own mistakes by using our own shelter as a part of that solution to draw down atmospheric carbon that we burned and like wrongly put the world out of balance, like that's an incredible opportunity that those thick walls, also the thicker they are, the better in some ways, right? I mean, to a certain extent. So I just wanted to add that.
Great. I do want to open up to questions. I have one more thought, which is just to put out there, like, does it have to be wheat? Like, what other, could be other, and what are the, other sources, other grains?
Yeah, there are loads of grains that yield straw. We've actually discussed this, that I think you were saying rye had a different tensile strength to it, and so I think it really depends on which is going to be the best for building with. I don't personally know which. I think that would be something you guys could shed more light on.
Folks love rice. We have, a lot of straw bale builders who have used rice straw because it has a very high silica content, which then, people love because it feels a little bit more fire resistant, even though it's already really fire resistant. We've built with rye. I'm trying to think what else. We did try oat one time, right? Yeah, oats. We weren't quite as happy with it, but now I don't really remember why. So great opportunities to find more things. Go.
Two really quick pieces of that. So the modern straw bale architecture, you mentioned the original one was the westward settlers in Nebraska. The modern version of straw bale construction dates back to around the 80s, which was a partnership between the green building community in the desert Southwest that was trying to avoid the use of timber because of the timber wars happening in the Northwest. And the California rice growers, where the California Air Resource Board shut down the practice of burning the straw fields, and so they had a disposal issue, if you will, of their straw. So rice straw was the OG form of grain. I think one thing we get excited about panelization, and I get excited about what you're talking about, is there's so many other residues that if we aren't married to the form factor of a straw, we could look at sugarcane bagasse, we could look at, corn stalks. There's just so much fiber out there, we could chop it up and put it in a box. Like, I would like to think we've got the technological capacity of being able to manage that. Like, that seems like that should be within our grasp within the near term. So looking even, like, again, if we can get creative and look beyond, like, not just the form factor of the bale, but straw is the only residue material available to us. Again, that was just what we could work with that had precedent that we could activate immediately.
There are endless possibilities for field to form events, here moving forward, right? So, yeah.
Great. Right, we could go on forever, but how about your questions? Here we go. Thank you, Kathy.
Hi, I have a detailed question, nuts and bolts. How do you integrate, how do you even install like the electrical wiring, the pipes? Because I didn't see any of that in your slides. That's my question one. Second question is, have you considered using, how gabions, you're familiar with gabions, right? Where you have metal and I was thinking the metal could be the base for the metal lath for the plaster. And it would be lighter than using wood, So I was just thinking about it.
Yeah, I love that. I guess I'll say the second one first and then address the first one. Interestingly, well, at least in our climate, and maybe in other climates that are not combined with cold and wet, metal might be a better combination with straw. What we found in practicality is that when you combine metal with straw, it creates a point of condensation when that metal gets cold, and then moisture will condense on it, and it will actually create a point of potential rot. So that's been why we've moved away from metal in combination with our systems whenever we can. I mean, there certainly can't. We don't avoid fasteners 100%, but we don't place metal mesh on the exterior of our bales. Our plaster goes directly onto the straw. So I love your thinking, and it could be in certain climates that might work. I know that probably wouldn't work for us. The first question about the utility routing and how we handle that, there's kind of different approaches. One is kind of the old school thing that we learned and came up in, and many of us maybe have seen, which is that you can actually absolutely route and channel into the straw itself, and you can mount electrical directly into that bale. We would run typical Romex wire directly, just pin it into the bales, plaster over it, and set your switches or your boxes or whatever. So it's easy to do, and that's certainly, it can be done. There are pros and cons to that with working with traditional tradespeople who are like, what the heck is this? And then, so in terms of scale, it presents a challenge. And then also for any repair or any changing of that system, it's very, you have to do a lot to sort of like demolish the plaster and pull that out and move it around. So the thing that, we were mentioning that actually is shown on the Croft panel on the interior, and that we also showed some photos of, is a utility kind of channel, essentially, to the interior. First of all, we try not to put plumbing into exterior walls for a bunch of, because it's not great to be, in an exterior wall regardless. So that's not usually an issue, but in terms of electrical, it often is, and also penetrations for other kinds of mechanical, electrical, plumbing. So that chase to the interior has benefits, and many high-performance builders will tell you that actually keeping the air barrier to the interior of all of that utility mess is very beneficial from a high-performance building standpoint. So that's the other approach that we take. And then there's one that's sort of a hybrid, which is essentially we create a baseboard chase for our outlets. So when we're in an environment where we don't need code requirements for heights of outlets, and it's okay to put those into a thicker baseboard, we take that approach. And then we can set switches, either using surface run conduit or, some other method. I've been really excited about the wireless switches that have been coming out personally because of straw bales. I'm like, yes. Yes, thank you.
Hello.
Hello.
Okay, hold on. I gotta pull in my question. So I might be potentially working with New York City on like their emergency sheltering, and so I had a question related to that. I wanted to know, in today's cities like New York City that's doing emergency sheltering, how do you see this particular building type being adapted to an emergency sheltering situation, and if it's something that you think would bankrupt your companies? Because this is considered innovation in a way, so yeah.
I mean, I'll answer that there are panels that are being made out of straw. Agriboard is a company in Arkansas who's making panels specifically for emergency shelters. So that go into a metal channel. That's a fast assembling system. And it's interesting that there's a model where the lightweight, durability, and the fact that it's structurally stable can go up already provides an interior finish. It's interesting that that straw is the basis for that, right? But I think that one of the questions is that one of the great things about the prefabrication is that it speeds up a lot of the work that's on site. And this is, there is craft involved. This is, so I think trying to find a fit between the material, how it's manifested in the kind of form, and then how quickly that form needs to be built is a really interesting question. I'm not sure the mass of the straw is a good fit for emergency shelter, but it could if that was the challenge, right? And that's where I think the Agriboard is super interesting. So.
Yeah, because I'm also thinking some of the current locations for the sheltering are often where it will flood the most, and be the first place to get cold, and so yeah, like airport lots. So.
Right. Yeah. Okay, well, two quick things on that, and then I hear you have something. We actually were contacted by the city of Burlington to provide emergency shelters. They had a call out to folks to figure out, okay, who's going to provide some emergency shelters? This was for not last winter, but the winter before. And we were really excited. We were like, all right, we've got this thing. Here's the cabanita. This is what we have prepared. And they were like, ooh, it's too permanent. So it's very much what you were just saying. They were like, that's we need something that's just like this temporary emergency thing. I'm like, okay, so these folks are gonna need housing anyway. Are you serious? Like, we can't actually put something that is durable that people could live in for long term? Like, so again, that's where these logics of like the city and capitalism and, you know, all these pieces collide in a really brutal way, where it's like, no, let's not make something good, let's make something temporary. You're like, I got nothing.
Hi, I'm an architect from California. Been doing some straw bale for a little while. Before I ask my question, I just wanted to say about the steel mesh. In California, for seismic reasons, you have to have the steel mesh on the outside, so we do that. But moisture is not a problem there, so it's fine. But yeah, you just wrap it and plaster right over. It's great. My question is, I've now moved to New York, and so trying to understand how to detail with moisture and straw. But also very curious about how you're addressing where the straw meets grade. I saw some details in there where maybe we were imagining straw below grade, and we have done wood foundations that are actually below grade, but the only way to do that is to put a trash bag around it, essentially, and keep all the water out. And so I'm curious, number one, are there any details that I should be aware of, or maybe resources we can look at to translate from California to Northeast? And then second, have you guys looked at grade or below grade straw bale construction? It doesn't require all the concrete.
Well, I would argue as much as possible, try to not go below grade, right? Which is the,
Yes.
you know, that as much as possible, and then lift above. But I think it's really hard to position it straw below. In fact, I don't know, I can't think of any details that do that successfully. So, yeah, so. Yeah, I don't know the answer to that because probably don't want to do it. So, but yeah, so.
Yeah, I would totally echo that. I mean, we're relatively conservative given the fact that we're like straw bale innovators, but we're rooted really strongly in building science, and there's nothing sustainable about a building that's going to rot out quickly. There's nothing healthy about introducing a lot of mold into your assembly. So in general, we try to keep biogenic materials out of below grade environments. There's some exceptions to that. A lot of the work that we've been doing is to how to avoid having to go below grade more than absolutely necessary, because you're sort of forced into a palette of materials that are inherently intensive. And so there's like a whole other like conversation we can have around minimizing the impact of subgrade construction. Sometimes you can't. Sometimes it's worth it. I mean, we live in a place where our frost depth is 6 feet in some locations, and especially if we're on a hillside, then like, okay, you can make an argument. That's why, for example, I'm going to reference that beam tool again. If you are in a position in which you do need to invest a significant portion of your carbon or your industrial material intensive budget into these subgrade applications, that would then, in my mind as a designer, compel me to offset that impact through the selection of other materials that are going to try to balance out the intensivity of needing to pour that concrete or use that PIC foam or whatever else you've got going on below grade. In terms of the detailing, I would say it's actually really pretty straightforward. In terms of resources for that, we've got some publications on that. We've written some stuff. That's one resource for cold climate relevant straw construction in the Northeast. It very much tracks along other high performance building approaches using sort of biojason moisture tolerant materials that allow for an outward vapor drive, that try to have some degree of vapor throttle in the interior. Airtight construction is an absolute priority specifically for moisture. So like, let's be super clear when we talk about like our value around why we love airtight construction. It is thermal in its benefit of keeping the heat from that air in the building, but primarily we're doing that as a moisture control mechanism so that we're not introducing too much humidity into the wall assembly to then condense against outer layers and cause mold issues or rot issues. So, the bottom of wall detailing, get them up above the ground. So you saw some of our details are using helical piers. That's one of the most effective mechanisms we found to be able to both protect the bale as well as reduce the intensivity of site disruption and concrete consumption, so on and so forth. There's definitely limitations to that as well. So then there's lots of other, there's just a whole host of other cold climate sort of foundation solutions that I would say are directly applicable to straw construction. If you take the straw out and you put wood fiber or cellulose in there, and it'll marry a lot of other typical details you'd find in this region.
We would love to keep the conversation going, but we're going to have to wrap this up. So please help me in thanking our panelists tonight. And thanks again to the Architecture League for partnering with us. We hope you'll be back for many more of these kinds of events and have more bread and look at more samples. Thanks for coming, everybody.